Well, hi, welcome to episode 46 of Lean Whiskey. I'm Mark Graban, joined as usual by
Jamie Flinchbaugh. Good to see you, Mark.
good to see you. Good to see you. It's been a little while, but we do these episodes when we can, and I'm glad the timing worked out for us tonight. As we record this, it's been just about a month since the total solar eclipse. Were you able to see it, Jamie?
No, so Pennsylvania wasn't right in the path unless you were like in Erie.
Mhm.
But and I had meetings during that time frame anyway. But more importantly, we had sun all day and then cloud cover, so we could probably catch about 20% eclipse, and then the cloud covers prevented the rest.
Yeah. I had seen a partial eclipse before. I had never seen a total. So our place here in the Dallas area was in the totality, thankfully. So we had an eclipse party. We had people visiting from Houston, which was not in the path of the totality. Some friends from Michigan. I was stressed because the forecast. I mean, there was clouds, and
Yeah,
the
you were supposed to
forecast.
be clouds.
I was worried my Michigan friends were going to be upset that they didn't go to Cleveland or Indianapolis, but we had the time together, and the clouds parted enough where like the wispy clouds in front of it, like that was part of it, and it really was an amazing experience. So very very fortunate that we could see that from out in the backyard.
Yeah. So you're in Dallas again now, but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think I would travel for it. Um, but I think if I was in the path of totality, I would preserve the time. But since I wasn't, I haven't thought about clearing my schedule, and kind of really glad I didn't, because it just we just really didn't see anything. So and it just got a little dark outside, and
Hmm.
the birds started eating a lot more. I
Hmm.
noticed, and a few things like that. But yeah, almost a non-event where I was.
Yeah. And yeah, I do. I mean, I would travel to see one again. I mean, in 2017, I'm kicking myself that I didn't travel for the one that crossed the US. We were in Orlando, that was like 70%
Okay.
totality. If we'd gone up into Georgia, I think was the closest place. But maybe someday. I mean, it was, we had about 2.5 minutes of it. It was pretty spectacular.
Yeah. Awesome.
I do recommend it. 10 out of 10 would
10 out of
would
10.
would do again. 5 stars on Yelp.
Well, I'm sure they're working on their Google reviews. So
The sun is undefeated so far in reviews and its place in our solar system. But our theme tonight is really about AI, and sometimes that seems like magic. Sometimes that seems cool. Sometimes it's underwhelming. But the thing we're doing first was an experiment of making a cocktail that Chat GPT recommended based on ingredients that you have at home. I've played around with this before, but tonight is a new cocktail. So we'll talk about what we're drinking, what guidance we gave Chat GPT. You had kind of a hiccup though at first,
yeah,
right?
I mean, my first attempt, and this was with ChatGPT 4. I listed all the ingredients I had, and my bar was a little understocked at the moment, but so it wasn't even that many,
Mhm.
but it was more than enough, and it included every ingredient I had. It was just like a little bit of this, a little bit of that,
Was
and
it
it
like a quarter ounce of everything?
of everything, and it was kind of a hot mess. I was like, this doesn't make a lot of sense. And ChatGPT will do some of those things. It adds flourish and goes overboard when it doesn't have to. I've noticed that in other instances. So
It's
um,
good. It's good you were supervising it in this case, though. Your common sense said no. Bad Chat GPT.
bad thing, bad idea. And so then and we'll come back to that point, but later on. But it's
Mhm.
I then I actually had the opportunity to shop and add all the other ingredients I like to use for mixers that I was out of,
Mhm.
and then got to ask it again. And honestly, if it gave it all of them, it would have been a real crazy drink at that
Yeah.
point. But in that case, I really made sure I gave it the instructions. You do not need to include everything.
Yeah.
Um, so So I made sure to give it clear instructions about what not to do as well as what to do. And I think I specified a bourbon cocktail. Because I didn't go down the path of opening up the whole thing. So what Chat GPT came back with was the Bourbon Harmony, and it's still more complicated than it needs to be. I will say, but it's the basic recipe is 2 ounces of bourbon, half an ounce of Lillet Blanc, half an ounce of Aperol, and at that point you kind of have the Boardwalker recipe, which is already a drink.
Yeah.
Then it adds a 1/4 ounce of Drambuie, which is hardly ever used except in a rusty nail.
Mm-hmm. It's a sweet Scotch-based liqueur, right?
Right. It's a honey Scotch-based with a heather flower honey mixed in, and then 2 dashes orange bitters, 1 dash Angostura bitters, and then orange peel for garnish. I didn't have orange peel, but I did have candy orange peel, so that's in my cocktail. And I did then ask it, I said, here's 4 different bourbons I have, which are all kind of in my mixer shelf. Yeah. And it recommended of the 4, Elijah Craig. So that's my base. Mm-hmm. The argument is Elijah Craig's kind of fairly well balanced to begin with. And so since this drink is so balanced, so to speak,
harmonious as the name,
that was probably a good thing. So it does look a bit like a Boardwalker.
How's it taste?
It's not bad. I'm not going to say it's bad by any means. It's not bad. It's a decent cocktail. A little unnecessarily complex. Mm-hmm. The Drambuie doesn't really come out very much. The bitters come through, but in a lot of ways, this tastes like a Boardwalker plus some bitters. And I get that if we're asking it to do a new recipe, most of the good recipes are taken, right? So it's
I wonder if it's a new recipe or if it ripped off some bartender, because I don't know how much it's going off of what it was trained on.
Well, and I think that's important, but I did include the instruction to make it an original recipe.
Oh, okay.
And I might have even said something like a recipe that does not exist or cannot be found. So I did try to instruct it to be original. So I don't think in this case it ripped anybody off. But since I've never seen Drambuie in anything but rusty nail, I'm gonna bet this is original.
Okay. Well, I prompted it more just along the lines of a whiskey-based cocktail that uses some of the ingredients that appear in this list. I'd never done that before. I'd never gotten the results that you had, also using the paid Chat GPT 4. But before I talk about the drink tonight, one other fun experiment, other than just feeding in a list of what you have on hand, is I've fed it that list, and I've asked it, what 2 or 3 ingredients should I go buy to add to this set of ingredients that would dramatically expand the range of what I could make. And so it comes up with some sort of obscure. I think it said I think it came up with a grapefruit liqueur, which I wouldn't normally have on hand. And
no, and you probably still would only use for a very specific recipe. So it's kind of how my cabinet's expanded is, here's a recipe I like, or I'm interested in. Let me go buy the one thing I need to make that recipe, and now it's on my shelf. So
no, it should last on the shelf forever. I think at times I've bought, very particular spices that I've never used again. Like that one time I was making Indian food. There are some very specific spices that you don't use unless you're making Indian food all the time. And I find it easier to buy Indian food than.
Yep, you're right.
All right. So the drink I came up with tonight, or that Chat GPT came up with, it called it a Spiced Cherry Rye Cocktail. I'm like, okay, good start. It may also be unnecessarily complex. It's big, it's boozy. I should only have one. I don't know if I should drink the whole thing. It's 2 ounces of rye, and I didn't ask it. I should have. I chose a Rossville Union bottled in bond rye, which is an MGP product from Indiana. They make really good rye, and this is one of the brand names that they're putting out, that they're releasing whiskeys under. Half ounce of tart cherry liqueur, because I have one of those from Michigan that I brought home last year. Hello, Michigan Lean Consortium. Half ounce of Italicus. Do you know Italicus?
No, that's one I do not have.
We've used it. I forget, we bought it, I'm sure, like you were saying, Jamie, for some cocktail. It is a bergamot liqueur. Chat GPT says to add a light floral and citrusy note. And then a quarter ounce of green chartreuse, which I love and happen to have on hand. A quarter ounce of Aperol and a half ounce of lemon juice. So let me do the math. That's like four ounces of liquid in the giant martini glass.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, did I say lemon juice? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so this is literally on my first sip. I have a backup whiskey in case this is just terrible.
Always a good risk mitigation plan.
I'm going to use the same words you did. It's not bad.
But it's not going to become part of your repertoire.
No.
You're going to make one for friends.
No. Yeah. This is a one-off, but I don't know. Do I need to go back and give Chat GPT feedback? Like, it's starting to get supposedly a better persistent memory over time as you interact with it, and that'll be interesting to see how that develops. And I don't know, do you have any other tips? I mean, I think like the prompting is such an important thing to play around with, just like in general, or maybe just a conversation topic before we get into the main. Or you can tell me, wait till we get to the AI topic. I was going to ask you, how have you used AI in your work recently?
So we'll talk about that part a little later.
Okay.
But I think as it applies to just this, I mean, I'm now kind of curious because I always say act like A, right? And act like a marketing specialist, act like a product manager, act like a whatever. And I said for this, act like a mixologist. Right?
Yeah, right.
And a mixologist is known for, overly complicated stuff in a lot of cases, right?
Unique drinks. Yeah, you wouldn't make it home.
I found this fossil that I ground up into dust, and so I wonder if but bartenders, right? Their priority is simplification. They like simple cocktails because they have to make many. So I'm kind of curious if I would have said act like a bartender, would it have made a simpler cocktail? I don't think it would have, because I don't think it would really differentiate between the two in how it acts. Although I do think if I said explain the difference between a mixologist and a bartender, you would get a reasonably good answer, because those are the questions that it's pretty good at, because it comes up with the median answer.
I'm going to do a quick experiment. Come up with another alternative, but do so as a upscale mixologist wearing a leather apron. Try to set some of the scene. I don't know.
If you had a fedora, then you're...
Yeah, it says, as an upscale mixologist donning a well-worn leather apron and a keen eye for intriguing flavor combinations. So I came up with something that was peated scotch, green chartreuse, Italicus, dry curacao, lime juice, and Angostura bitters.
You lost the cherry, right? But but a lot of the same, let's use some of those same ingredients. But doesn't seem very different, right? In terms of its approach. On your cocktail, if you were to then delete an ingredient that would maybe make it better, is it obvious to you what you would delete?
Probably the Italicus.
Okay.
So I can say suggest something like the Spiced Cherry Rye Cocktail, but without Italicus. So certainly it's cheerful. Let's adapt it, omitting the Italicus, but still ensuring the cocktail remains vibrant and complex. Oh, so it went to Cointreau.
Okay. So really, you really wanted uh, something like that in there.
Yeah,
So
basically the same drink, no chartreuse, and it went for Cointreau. I haven't had that much of the cocktail yet, Cointreau. So it took out the herbal and added, the orange liqueur. So probably less complex. It might taste better, but
right. I mean, I would drop the Drambuie, but at that
Mhm.
point, you're pretty much at a Boardwalker, which is already a cocktail in my repertoire.
See,
Um,
that's new to me. I learned something. The
yeah,
boardwalker.
Boardwalker is bourbon, Lillet Blanc, and Aperol, and it's a very light, nice cocktail. I enjoy it, especially in the summer. It's kind of like when I go to the beach. That's last summer. That was my
Mhm.
not on the beach, but at the beach cocktail.
It sounds like a lighter version of a Boulevardier.
Yeah, I think that's a fair description. Much less bitter, less sour, and very much lighter. So yeah, I think that's a fair description. But yeah, like I said, not bad. Definitely sweet. Obviously, the Drambuie helps with that along the way. But I think it's fun to experiment, and I think this is. Uh, one of those good uses for AI, which is not to give you the finished product, but to give you a first draft.
Yeah.
So I have a friend who likes to say about AI, most of us, and this most of us is important, are better editors than we are novelists.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole point is like get a starting point from AI and then edit that starting point. And while my edits bring me back to a cocktail that already exists, yours definitely, if you then took that and added or subtracted some ingredients on your own, probably does leave you in a very different place.
Yeah. Yeah. I think editing the AI or iterating with the AI. The AI doesn't get tired or exhausted of iteration, or I don't think it gets annoyed with feedback. So I think just saying, do it again, but do this. Or I was just goofing around here. I said, do it again, but pretend that you're a little drunk. And so it's just, I don't know, it's just talking a little bit more loosely when it's giving the ingredients. It says quarter ounce Aperol, parentheses, a touch bitter, like a joke that didn't land, but you laugh anyway. Like now it's just being kind of goofy
Now it's
instead
just
of just telling me why that ingredient is there.
so. Yeah, I think as you do this, I think the what can happen is it can get stuck in a channel. Um, for example, I was using it. When I do Leadership 360 with a client, I kind of wanted to generate an original name for what I call what I do. So I used it to help me generate ideas for names, and I never used what it gave me, but it sped up the brainstorming process. But I basically said like no more than 4 words, and every single it gave me like 20 different options, but every single one was 3 words. Like it just was unable to give me 2 words or one word. It just we're going to use no more than 4 words. It just kind of got stuck on that 3. So it can get a bit of tunnel vision. Which is interesting, and we've had instances where we'll ask it to do something, and then we'll just sort of start over and ask it to do the same thing, and ended up a different place because we felt it got stuck on a kind of locked into a mindset and couldn't get unlocked. So.
And then there's times it just kind of screws up where I use Chat GPT often to summarize long documents. Give me a summary, or even sometimes like a long document that I've written. I'll ask it to do a 100-word summary just to see what it parses out, and if I wanted to use a 100-word summary on LinkedIn or something, and you say, okay, 100-word summary, and then when it spits out, you go and check, it's like 117 words.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, come on. This AI, it's learning quickly. It's not ready to take over now. It could be more capable at more important things.
That's for sure. So we're kind of jumping into the AI topic a bit. So did you want to just jump headlong into that?
Yeah, so we're going to go, as we call it here, in the news. But first, there's one kind of quick hit that we want to touch on. We often, leaders, people from the auto industry, as they've passed away over the last couple of years, we've sometimes shared some thoughts. And about a week ago, Don Petersen, who was CEO of Ford from in the 80s. I should have
Late
had
80s.
late 80s, 85 to 1990. Don Petersen is the one quite often cited as the one who welcomed in Dr. Deming to come work, not just with people throughout the company, but with Don Petersen. Dr. Deming mentioned Peterson probably in the New Economics, probably the later book. From Dr. Deming's life. And, it's interesting to read the stories about Don Petersen and, his emphasis on quality and trying to bring Deming principles into the company. But, it was probably just such an uphill battle, even to have the CEO as, a proponent of the quote unquote Deming philosophy.
Yeah, but he certainly made progress while his time there. And while he didn't transform permanently, most journeys are, 3 steps forward, 1 step back. So, take your forward steps when you can. And they definitely did under Don Petersen on the quality front, on the human front, right? They were coming off some bad times and some rounds of bad leadership. I mean, let's not forget the Deuce was not, while he wasn't the immediate predecessor, the Deuce was not considered a role model leader in any annals. But as you start to look at some of what he did, including bringing in Dr. Deming, he really did it against pretty fierce resistance, right? There's certainly some backstories that you and I have probably both heard about what would happen to Dr. Deming when he's in the hallways, and how many of the executives and leaders would just ignore him.
Mm-hmm.
But you only need to get a few, right?
Yeah.
And I know he also after that did work. Actually around the same time was doing work with GM, not with many, but one of my mentors, later business partners, Denny Pauly, was also mentored by Dr. Deming when Denny was running the Fierro plant, actually. Which he didn't design, so that's put that part aside. And so I think the interesting part of bringing Dr. Deming in is, did it transform Ford permanently? Maybe not, but it transformed people in Ford that helped continue to carry it forward. And so, and some of those people left Ford and went other places, but it absolutely had that impact in the organization. So I think, hats off to Don Petersen. He certainly took an industry that was still mostly ruled by 4-letter words, and tried to make it a different place, and made progress along the way.
Yeah. And I wrote a blog post, maybe we can link to it in the show notes, that pulled some of the quotes from the different remembrances and articles. But, the things that stood out to me was, it seemed like, Don Petersen was, really serious about, he took the Deming message of driving fear out of the organization, and, not wanting to perpetuate what Peterson called, dictatorial management styles that he had worked under coming up the ranks. And so, I appreciate and admire that he was wanting to kind of change, or at least break some of that cycle.
Yeah. And Ford, especially assembly operations, had a reputation of being one of the meanest organizations in the planet. So, again, he had his work cut out for him. It was an uphill battle, but, not only was he successful at moving up the hill, just willing to take it on when probably very few people wanted him to, is pretty significant. So, so cheers to the career of Don Petersen.
Yeah, passed away at age 97. A long, interesting life. So, okay, now back to back to AI. I'm going to let you take the lead on this, Jamie.
Sure. Yeah, I think, the whole idea is thinking about, how would a lean thinker think about AI? And we can talk about that at three different levels, and I think we'll largely skip the first, which is societal, right? Where is AI taking society? And it's not that a lean thinker shouldn't think about that, just not so much that we are today. Although we may still go back to that. Second would be organizational. How does an organization use AI? And then third, how does an individual use AI? And it's not like we broke it into sections. It's just sort of a framework to think about. AI is in a lot of different places, and most of the news coverage is around the future of AI and where it's headed and all that sort of things. But for many people closer to it, it's while they're not ignoring the future, they're also in the here and now. How do we make it useful? How do we make it pay for itself? How do we leverage it to be successful? And it is important to recognize that AI has been around a very long time. Been around a very long time. There's models for AI that go back to, I think, the 50s and 60s.
But was that limited to, like, it can play tic-tac-toe against you?
Well, and some of it was just frameworks, mathematical models that just the computing power wasn't there. And so there were sort of two bottlenecks for AI. One was the data, and one was the computing power. And I know there was a visual AI, and I forget the name of it. It's a while now. It's a couple decades, but it trained on like 100 pictures. 100 pictures, and now we can train on hundreds of thousands of pictures.
And is that part of the difference between something that's just purely an algorithm or code versus AI, like the ability of feeding something in and it can learn and generate something new instead of just doing calculations?
No, I think that was always the case for AI. Like, I wrote some machine learning code back in the early 90s that wasn't just an algorithm. It was basically taking feedback of what happened in reality, comparing it against essentially its hypothesis, and then essentially adjusting the algorithm based on what's actually happening. And so to me, AI or machine learning is the cycle of comparing predetermined predictions against real results, whatever that might be. Whether it's simply word matching, which word selection, which is a lot of large language models. So my AI was really just machine learning, and it had to do with optimizing power generation smokestacks to reduce emissions, because there was 100 variables from the fineness of the pulverized coal to the angles of the burners to the ambient temperature of the stack. Just hundreds of variables, and then how do you get the system to self-correct as much as possible? And so I don't know if this is really an official term or if it's just my own, but I think that's what I would call deterministic AI. Right? It's trying to solve a specific problem, whereas most generative AI, whether it's artwork or large language models, are not our general purpose. They're trying to solve whatever next problem you put in front of them.
Yeah. And Chat GPT is in that generative AI category.
Right? It is in that generative. It's not designed to solve any particular problem, which means it's okay at solving a whole bunch of ones, bad at solving some, and pretty good at solving others. And so that might be my first point around, a lean thinker's approach to AI, which is know what a tool's used for.
Yeah.
Right. So, whether it's, fish bones or, data analysis or visual systems or an A3 or, 5 Ys, know when and where that works. And the same thing is true of AI. As you mentioned earlier, it's a good tool if you need to start with an edit, or if you want to iterate, it's effective, especially in the language space around those problems to solve, right? Those particular use cases. So know when it is. It's not a catch-all for all things.
Yeah. It seems like a good advice. And how would you break down AI versus machine learning?
So I believe most machine learning I would call deterministic, which is it is designed to solve a specific problem. And I would also say there often is, for any particular set of variables, a right answer or an optimal answer. Where I believe AI can include that, right? So this is a whole square rectangle thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all machine learning is a subset of AI, but my view would be most machine learning is deterministic. It's giving you an answer to a specific case, and there is most likely either a right answer or an optimal answer.
So I'm thinking. Let me check my understanding here. So when I was in college 30 years ago, we would have deterministic optimization models. Like, for example, route planning for delivery vehicles. You could with different distances and with a map, kind of come up with the optimal route for a truck. Would it become machine learning if you're now feeding in data from the vehicles as they're actually driving on the roads, and at different times of day there's different traffic patterns, and the model would learn and change the optimal routing?
Right. And so if you build that linear program or whatever that modeling is, it's based on fixed assumptions, right? And the assumptions are also simplification of reality by definition.
Mm-hmm.
Every single time. It's like, oh, this is the speed limit, and well, drivers are going to drive that speed limit instead of, oh, they're driving into the sun or, there's buses there or whatever that might be. I was very early to the doctor the other day expecting a lot of school buses, but they were always going the other way. So, so the school buses were there, it just didn't affect my route. So I would think that both rather than assuming certain parameters, you learn what actually those parameters are and allow for them to be changed. That would take linear programming to the space of machine learning. And I still believe the ROI, well, I don't say still believe, I currently believe that the ROI on machine learning deterministic solutions is still a whole lot higher than most generative large language model applications. Because there's a real problem to be solved. You can get closer to a right or optimal answer faster and with less investment.
Okay.
So first, let's just talk about our cocktails. If we, this would be machine learning, is if we created a cocktail and had 100 people lined up and they all rated it.
Yeah.
And fed that back. And then it would generate a new recipe based on that feedback. And so it would try 10 different recipes and then take those ratings of 100 people, which would be its feedback loop, and start to go, okay, here's what seemed to drive up scores and here's what seemed to drive down scores. And so was it how many, but it can consider, is it how many ingredients? Is it what the ingredients were? Is it, keep it simple? Is it, mask the liquor with, sweet stuff, which is quite frankly what most cocktails seem to be these days. And so it would get to, again, the deterministic side is what's going to be the cocktail that drives the highest average rating.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the type of decision making that, I don't know, a senior mixologist might do. And does that open up a world where a bar who couldn't afford or wouldn't have access to that skill set could get it through technologies, or does that get into the realm of maybe, replacing humans?
Well, I think for now, the exact opposite. I think only a multi-site, multi-location, hundreds of thousands of customers who can give feedback would be enough data to allow you to train a model to develop, new drinks.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a mixologist is going to go on 5 data points.
Yeah.
And so, I would think to actually use AI to do that as a true machine learning optimization pathway, it would be much more expensive and time consuming than actually just hiring a mixologist.
Mm-hmm.
But it may be more optimal.
Yeah.
Right? It may get you to, less bias, because the mixologist, no matter which one you get, right? If you hire one mixologist, by definition, they're biased, right?
Yeah.
Biased on their own opinion, biased on their training, biased on not just what do the public like.
Right.
So I think that's one reason. The second reason is if I were doing that, I'd still have a mixologist run the experiment. Know what questions to ask, know what parameters to input, right? Is it about percentages? Is it about, is it about the alcohol content? Is it about the garnish? What are the right questions to ask? What are the right parameters to test?
Mm-hmm.
The mixologist would have to tell you that. Like when I wrote, my machine learning way back when, I didn't know the smokestack. I needed, I was given this assignment, so it was pretty straightforward. But somebody told me what the parameters are to start to play around with and program. So to me, I don't think it replaces the mixologist. And I also think it gives a greater advantage to those with more resources rather than less.
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, if all you want to do is have an original cocktail, and you don't care how people react to it, and you don't need data to validate it, you just want an original cocktail, then do what you and I did. Ask Chat GPT to generate an original cocktail, and you have something original on your menu. Whether it's good or not, the public will let you know.
Yeah. I mean, there's designing a drink, and then there's designing, take it up a level, a bar. Like, does Chat GPT replace somebody like a John Taffer? Would you iterate with Chat GPT about trying to figure out like what the best concept for a bar in a certain location would be in terms of the theme, the name, the decor, the menu? I don't know if it would come up with even reasonable answers.
Well, and using all large language models, by definition, it's going to give you, for the most part, this is an oversimplification, it's going to give you the most median answer.
Right? The most likely word to appear next. And
the most likely word to appear next, right? That's the median and not even the mean. So do you want to stand out? Not probably a good way to do it. You want to be super original? Probably not a great way to do it. So could you do that? Sure. But I think this goes into one of my lessons, sort of a lean thinker's lens on AI, is I still think the experienced person is going to be better both on the front end and on the back end in using the AI to accomplish that task. Yeah. So what I mean by good, so I think if you look at effective delegation, right? So what, if you really think about what's included in effective delegation to an employee, and you just treat Chat GPT like an employee, right? And so what does effective delegation look like? Well, you have to give clear instructions, right? What are those clear instructions? And there's a lot of ways to give any of these tools, Claude or Gemini, unclear instructions. So give it clear instructions.
Does that include the instruction of what problem we're trying to solve? Back to kind of a core lean question.
Yes, absolutely. If I said, hey, I want to create a cocktail that will satisfy the highest percentage of people. That's different than I want the most original, knock your socks off, nobody's ever heard of it, but people will go, I've never tasted that before cocktail. That would be different, different instructions. I think you have to provide context of the information that it needs to make that decision. One of the most useful, I'll call it hacks, it's not really a hack, but tips for Chat GPT or any of these LLM tools is ask it to ask questions of you before it begins the task.
Oh,
So you kind of
what's
go.
a good example of that?
So what is a good example of that? So I was, well, I'll go back to the example I used earlier. Hey, I have this, I do a process of Leadership 360 and I want to generate a name around it. What questions would help you generate good answers or good names for that?
Mm-hmm.
And it would ask a bunch of questions, whether they're useful or not. And you answer them. And then, of course, it goes into the task. So, often what's missing in delegation when somebody gets a task wrong, I think the most frequent miss in a delegated task that then gets a negative response from the boss or manager is because context was missing. And that's, of course, the leader's responsibility, right? My job is to provide you the context you need in order to do the task effectively. But I didn't think of all the things that were necessary. And so I skipped some stuff or just assumed you knew it, which is, of course, wrong. I do think part of delegation is assessing the capabilities, like, are you capable of doing this task? And of course, Chat GPT won't say, well, actually, it will say no. Right? There are things that will say, I'm not prepared to,
Right.
or, able to do that. And then, the last part of delegation is assess the work, right? We don't just set people off and assume it's right. We assess the work and give feedback and adjust. And it's amazing how often, again, we keep talking about Chat GPT, but that's not the only tool
Just one, right?
in the works. I've actually played around with Claude more recently, just out of since it was built by former OpenAI people. How different is it? How much of the same is it? And I found some very distinct differences. But
is that Google?
No, Claude is
Different.
different. It's different. I forget the name of the company. I want to say Archimedes, but I think that's wrong. But
Google is Gemini. They changed the name, and
Google is Gemini. Claude is another startup of former employees of OpenAI that went off and did their own thing. But yeah, you'll look at their work and go, wait a minute, this isn't right, and you kind of just assume it's right, and you look at it and go, it's not right, and sometimes it's even as simple. This one blows my mind. Is you can ask one of these tools, hey, did you follow all of my instructions? And you're like, well, of course, software, of course it did, but you find out it didn't. It goes back and reads the instructions and realizes, no, it didn't read all the instructions, and then it corrects itself and moves forward from there. So again, you still have to be the judge, the evaluator of that work. And so this is where I do think it doesn't replace most specialties, most specialized bodies of knowledge. It simply makes it more efficient. Now, by making it more efficient, maybe we need less of that person. But does it replace them? I don't think it does.
So, in the Wall Street, I think it was the Wall Street Journal article that you had shared, and it's going to be in the show notes. It seemed like there were a couple of different approaches. One is, that personal productivity. Professionals are using AI in different ways that allows them to do more, and hopefully the quality is as good, if not better. That could allow a company to grow. Right? Hopefully, that's not leading to mass layoffs. The company can serve more customers, solve more problems, do better work. But then it sounded like there were a few companies where it was more like, well, we're being told there's all these promises of AI, so we're just going to fire thousands of people, and we know we'll figure it out. It's sort of like put in the layoffs before any sort of real improvement, or it's kind of cost cutting mindset versus lean mindsets of thinking about flow and quality and customers and capacity and your people. But
yeah, and while I don't want to be unempathetic, But if you ask people to dramatically change their work, but don't create a compelling reason in order to do so, it's not easy to create change, right? It's just, doesn't mean you won't, but there are efforts you can do to drive people to do hard things. But in general, people don't wake up and go, let me reinvent myself. Let me reinvent my work. That's not a random Tuesday activity.
Yeah.
And so if you said, hey, your team has half the people it had yesterday. Okay, now we have to consider a different thing. We can't do Tuesday the way we did Monday. And so we're forced to consider different methods of work. Now, does that automatically lead to AI and productivity improvements, or does it lead to quitting and drop balls and failure?
Yeah.
It's going to be some of both, right? But if you want people to wake up on a Tuesday and every one of them think twice about the work in front of them, well, cutting half the team is one way to do that. Like I said, I don't want to sound unempathetic to what happens to those that are gone, but it certainly shakes up. It disrupts the status quo, right? And now now I have choices. I have to go forward some way, whether it's good or not is anybody's guess.
Yeah. Well, I think of one business owner that I talked to recently, also, a lean practitioner, lean thinker, if you will, Ankit Patel, who I've known for a long time.
Yes.
And he, his wife's an optometrist. I believe not. I think I have that right. Not ophthalmologist. I think she's optometrist.
I think
they, own some locations of optometry clinics, and they of course sell eyeglasses and contacts in the Atlanta area. And Ankit has gotten involved in that business, and this will be, the focus. He'll be the guest on the Lean Blog Interviews podcast. We've already recorded it. It's probably going to be about 6 weeks before the episode's released. But he was talking about some of the challenges and really talking about where to use AI. Back to the question of what problem to solve, not using AI for the sake of AI, but, they were really having trouble hiring people. And, he made the strategic decision that employees probably wouldn't make, of like, we need to centralize some back office functions in terms of appointment scheduling and other, phone-based customer communication. So he's also, talking about using AI for training and for interviewing people. Like he's using APIs or, I think he's actually hired a developer who's tapping into some AI tools to basically have faster PDSA cycles, to automate some of the waste, to do a better job of identifying and hiring and onboarding people they are hiring, doing quality auditing. And, I think he used an example of asking open-ended, I think some of the first round interviews are people typing responses to open-ended questions and, and feeding that through AI tools to kind of help evaluate answers. He thought it was doing a very good job of that. But I think, again, Ankit was, serving as a supervisor to the AI, not just blindly trusting it.
Right. Nor did he delegate this task to somebody that just had to fill slots. He wanted to make sure it performed well and it was strategically important. So it was a senior level task, not a delegated task. And so, I do worry that we revert to the mean, if you will, overusing tools around things like hiring, but processing language data, we've seen tremendous success of, let me take a large block of data, of language data, and generate themes, right? Summarize this down to a few things, right? So if you have a giant pile of data input into Salesforce.com, and I'm pretty sure Salesforce.com is building their own tools to do this if they haven't already. But nevertheless, if you have a whole bunch of data about customers and rejections and lost sales and lost prospects, then how do you summarize that? And, with language stuff, that's always been a challenge because, it's hard. It's not a pull down menu. So you can't go left. They turned us down because our price was too high. They turned us down because the competitor's price was lower. Well, those are two different answers, right? But, they are the same. And in the end, we had a pricing problem. And so the ability to take things that do, are the same but are said differently, but put a theme around that and build that theme. That's pretty a pretty good use from a summarized data kind of standpoint. Yeah. What it won't give you is the diamond in the rough. Like, hey, I asked 100 people, and here's the average answers. But like, oh, there's this one quote that somebody said that makes me really curious what's behind it. And that diamond in the rough piece of data, once I peek behind it, can open things up. And so that's the kind of stuff that's going to be harder for it to find because its job is to summarize.
Yeah. And, hopefully people aren't, I think this is another good point Ankit made when we talked. He's learned the lessons along the way of not trying to automate a bad process.
Yes.
Don't use AI to do work that shouldn't be done to begin with. I think would be an example of that. And we know a lot of people, including in healthcare, have made mistakes of trying to automate a bad process, or it was just bad automation. Quick story, if I can. This could be the cocktail talking, which it did grow on me as I'm getting down to my last sip. Not going to make another one, of course. But I was at a hospital recently because a family member had outpatient surgery. And there was this, robot going around. It was like a giant industrial Roomba, if you will. It was, making noise and cleaning the floor. I'm not convinced it was really accomplishing anything, but it was moving. It was going around, and it was smart enough to stop if there was traffic. And like I always wonder about automating a job like that. How the type of job that might have been done by a human who could actually smile at people and give directions and do all sorts of other things that the robot can't do. But then later in the afternoon, this little robot was just, I think its battery had died. It was just stuck in a spot, and these red lights are blinking, and it sat there for hours. And like, who's managing the robot? I don't know how long it was going to sit there. It certainly wasn't cleaning.
No, it certainly wasn't cleaning. You weren't paying it, $17 an hour at that time either. But this is, these are some of the challenges. Is it to reduce a cost, or is it to do a job that nobody wants to do and we have a hard time hiring for? Those are, I think, different questions. What's it missing when we do it this way? I think these are important contextual questions to answer before you select the tool, right? Mm-hmm. And so this goes back to when I coach problem solving. Once we define the problem, some of my favorite coaching questions of all time are, what do we not know about this problem? What's the best way to go learn?
Right.
And then you choose an approach. You don't just jump in and do a process map or a fishbone or go and see. You ask yourself what you need to learn before you pick the tool to go learn it. Sometimes it's like, go ask Bob. Like, just he knows. But you have to ask those questions before you pick a tool. And so I think you do need to ask yourself those questions and kind of go, is AI, is automation, is that the right tool for this job? And then also ask yourself the second order questions. What are the unintended consequences of doing so? Right. And so, I do remember walking into a hospital once, and it was after hours. It was, I don't know if I went in the wrong place or what, but yeah, it took late night staff to, I don't know if they were cleaning staff or not, but late night staff to point me in the right direction because I was not in the right spot. So, what are the unintended consequences? What do I miss when those things happen? And so I think we have to be, always be careful, evaluate the result, but also continue evaluating the result. What are we really getting from that? So I don't think, again, this is where we can make things more efficient. We can probably achieve things that we can't otherwise. We might even accelerate some of the creativity processes. So it may not be more efficient. It might just be faster achieved. So I'll go back to my naming for the Leadership 360. I don't know if I spent less time coming up with a name, but I know I got to a name faster.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because I might have mulled on it for a long time, generated some ideas, but it might have only been 5 seconds at a time. Add a name to the list, and I keep thinking about it. This sort of allowed me to have a thought partner, walk down a path faster. So I got there faster, even if I spent the same amount of time on it.
Yeah.
But you have to ask yourself, what is the result? What problem am I solving by using this tool?
Yeah. Yeah. And, when I think of other podcasts that I'm doing, lean blog interviews and My Favorite Mistake, I'm using some AI tools to do things that I wouldn't have done before. I would have had to hire somebody, or it would have taken a lot of time. I'm getting better transcripts through an AI tool. It's called Toasty.ai, to give them a shout out. I've been very happy. That service has been a lot better than a previous automated transcription service I was using. It'll generate possible titles for the episode. It'll brainstorm a bunch of them. I like that starting point to go through and try to choose. It'll go through and pull out timestamps for the YouTube video of different topics. It'll do that very well. I haven't been running Lean Whiskey through that, but for this episode, I should use all the AI tools that I can, just to take advantage of those things. And then there's a different tool I'll run this episode through called Opus.pro that a lot of people use to come up with automated short clips that you can share on LinkedIn or YouTube or wherever. And you can tell it, how long you want the clips to be. You can type in certain keywords. So for My Favorite Mistake, I'll type in keywords like mistake or failure. And it supposedly uses its AI intelligence to come up with clips that are not only kind of clipped in a sense that start and end that makes sense, but clips that it thinks are going to be most compelling to people. And it kind of scores and ranks, and it might give you 25 short videos, and I'll use some of my judgment, right? So it's back to supervising. You can tweak the videos. You can do a little bit of editing if it didn't quite get the start and end right. But that's something I would have never taken the time to do. And for something like roughly $30 a month, it's not only a huge time saver, but it's doing things that I think help get the word out about podcasts. So hopefully someone is willing to watch a short clip and they're like, oh, maybe I'll subscribe, or check out a full episode of the podcast. So those are a couple of the AI tools that I'm using.
Yeah, and so similar, I think, and this goes back to your point around never automate a bad process, is it's not just throwing tools at it, it's understanding your workflow and where the AI helps. So on the People Solve Problems podcast, we use Otter AI just to generate the transcript. That's all it's doing, just the transcript. And then we have a fairly highly engineered and PDSA achieved. So PDSA has been a big part of it. We're on iteration 10 or 15 of the prompt that we cut and paste into Chat GPT along with the transcript, generate the show notes. And it's all sorts. The prompt is, as long as the show notes are, it's just that it's the standard prompt.
But you've refined it.
But it's refined. It's everything from right at a 7th grade level. We found certain words that it would continue to use that were just flourishy and unnecessary. Like, don't use these words, right? So we excluded those.
Well, Chat GPT uses the word delve. Like whenever I see a post on LinkedIn that says something about we're going to delve into, I'm like, I bet that was written by Chat GPT.
Yeah, there's another one that used to really bug me, and it wasn't Delve, but it was something else, and I was like, it was just, I can't see that word anymore. It's just driving me nuts. It's just ChatGPT seemed to love it. And, but, we make sure we include the person's name and title and company. And so we add all these instructions, generate the show notes, but then, we edit. And what's interesting is, we'll sometimes find like, oh, this show's wrong. This show doesn't feel right. These show notes don't feel right. And we find out, well, there was a problem with the workflow, right? It became its own inspection tool. And I think in one case we had the whole transcript, which was included, like, what do we do before and after we hit record, right? It wasn't truncated to the show. It was all sorts of the background catching up that we did. I think there was another where, unintentionally we're using 3.5 instead of 4, which produced a very inferior result. But there's been show notes where I'm like, I didn't touch anything. And what's important is, I think, the use case. This is just a summary of what already happened. Mm-hmm. No creativity needed. It's just meant to be roughly accurate. Would I use it to write an article? Like I had articles out recently in Forbes on attention management over time management. Did I use it at all for that? No, I didn't touch it for that, because that was original thinking. Mm-hmm. That I wanted to articulate my view. So, there's editing AI tools and things like that. We don't even use that there. So it is, again, make it part of a workflow, but then make sure, just like when you put people in a workflow, the right quality controls are there. Everybody has the right inputs. We can evaluate success. We can measure success, whatever that might be. Those things are still important. We can't just assume AI is going to get it right.
Yeah. And, the Toasty.ai tool that I use will generate like 3 different versions of 2-paragraph long show summaries, right? So I kind of already have my own format for doing show notes. Like Jamie does the show notes for Lean Whiskey, and he's kind of, got a format and a style there. But I may pull and incorporate some of that summary, because, again, I think Chat GPT is very good at summarizing something. If there's an article online that just seems like way too long for what it's worth, you plug it in and say, hey, give me the 500-word summary. And then I don't care if it's 542 words summary. But, Chat GPT is good at that. It's good at brainstorming ideas. Like, I would more likely trust it to ask, like, what if I were completely starved for blog post ideas for Lean Blog or for Kinexus? Like, what are 5? You can even say, hey, scan this website or type in, give it a good long prompt about the company and the message and what you're trying to accomplish through the blog and who you're trying to attract. And, like, give me 5 or 10 ideas of articles I should write. Like, that can give some really interesting input. And I would trust that more than I would trust it writing the article.
Right. And I think that's a good point, right? Is if you're going to don't let it think for you all the time. Sometimes you think for you, edit this down, summarize it. That's great. But think the exact opposite. How do you help your thinking by letting it lead you? Mm-hmm. So a good example is I forget what the decision was now, but there's a decision I was trying to make, and mostly for fun and experimentation. I asked AI to say, what questions should I answer? Here's the decision I have to make. If I need to come up with the best answer, what questions should I ask myself in the process of coming up with this decision? Mm-hmm. So it broke it down in like 4 subsets, 4 different chunks, and 3 questions per chunk. And then here's a whole bunch of stuff to answer. And was there anything in that list that I couldn't have come up with on my own? No. But if you're stuck and you just need any framework to start answering the question, boom, off you go, right? Mm-hmm. You have a starting point to organizing your thoughts and trying to make a decision, solve a problem, whatever that might be. Mm. And so again, it's not doing your critical thinking, right? It's important to understand large language models in particular are not based on logic. They're based on language. And so they're only leveraging the logic that's already embedded in the language out there in order to help you answer the question, which means I believe, my opinion, is that critical thinking, problem solving skills, the ability to evaluate, information and answers will actually be more important skills in that world.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's where, I mean, like any technological leap, it seems like, jobs will change.
Yes.
Of automation of different types replaced some jobs, it created others. I think the one general problem, this is the societal point, it tends to create fewer of those jobs, like the jobs designing and building and repairing and programming robots. It's fewer jobs than the robots are maybe replacing in the repetitive manufacturing work.
Right. Higher paid, but fewer. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, again, we've created jobs like prompt engineers, and the idea of, how many prompt engineers we're going to need in the future might be quite a few. Fewer than, fewer than the number of people that were processing manually all the information that was once processed, but still a whole lot of job growth there. I think other things, as an example, right, there's a lot of things that when we see a lot of humans making decisions, we assume a certain level of ethical thinking behind that.
Yeah.
But not too much, right? So we kind of know where to draw the line of just assume on average people are acting ethically. And then at this level, don't assume, check, right? Yeah. So both of those are true. And I think we'll probably need more people who can think about and evaluate, are our answers ethical and fair, right? And so, like Grant Thornton, we'll link to one of their pieces. They kind of laid out here some AI governance things, but just talking about your developers, and this is true of any programming, but of course AI development being the same thing. Can people think beyond their own experience? Well, AI can't either, right? But can people think beyond their own experience? And so, do we have diversity in who's developing both our systems up front, but also our use cases, right? And do we have diversity there so that we're evaluating, are we getting, a fair answer, a broad answer, an ethical answer, a legal answer, whatever that might be. Yeah, I think there's plenty of need for human interaction in this whole world.
Yeah, there's a lot of risks, and there's one article we'll link to in the show notes. Also, Grant Thornton, talking about some of the risks that boards and others need to think about within companies. I mean, I think of examples of chatbot tools that were released and then very quickly were saying really offensive things and had to be shut down.
Yeah, and as we, not to go back to the societal broad points, but as I mentioned before, the two restrictive bottlenecks were computing power and data availability. But we're going to face those. I mean, we're already facing computing power. Not so much just the power itself, but the scalability of that power, right? So it's interesting that, chips are less of a bottleneck than the cables that connect all the mainframes right now. But
yeah.
But power generation, comes next, right? We don't have enough power to scale AI, which is part of what the Matrix was based on. But second is data availability. There's already a lot of thought around. There's not enough data to train AI, so we have to create synthetic data to keep training it. Well, what generates that synthetic training? So that's more AI. So, the hard part is, how do we make sure we're doing that, right? If we're going to train AI on synthetic data, then how do we generate synthetic data that's not based on the most base, perspectives of humanity, but helps elevate where we go without becoming social engineers, right? And that's where the argument of some of China's use, which is AI has to also support the tenets of the party in order for it to be allowed for use. And so now you're using AI to your own ends, and like any technology, right? We have Russian troll farms that have always been good at generating fake Facebook and TikTok and Twitter accounts,
Right.
And spreading false information. That's been true for a long time, and AI is going to make that job easier. But that's true with any technology, just like whether it's Morse code or the telephone, or the ability to fly. Every technology we've ever developed has had good uses and bad uses, and so we have to always be cognizant of that. The technology isn't inherently bad.
Yeah. Oh, heady stuff. Well,
but
I would say thank you to Chat GPT for the cocktail. It didn't make the cocktail for me, but
no, which is interesting, right? You still have to make it. Although I'm sure that's very possible. But that's a good example of a fit for use tool, right? Is it you're going to buy a robot that can clean the kitchen and make the cocktail, or just a cocktail mixing machine, which does exist, right? I don't know if it uses standard recipes or not, but yeah, heavy topic, and I think the whole idea of a lean mindset is experiment, learn, think critically. It's here, right? So don't ignore it, but learn your way through it, and think critically all the time about what's working, what's not, and why. Don't accept the black box for what it is.
Yeah. And I think the thing I would add for all of the hype about artificial intelligence, let's do what we can to tap into the human intelligence in our organizations as well, which means engaging people in improvement and helping people feel safe to speak up. And I'm not saying that eliminates the need for artificial intelligence, but let's not forget the human intelligence too. That's still not at full potential, at least the way organizations are treating people. And
right, far from it. So just like we talked about the inability to hire people. Well, sure, but are we utilizing all the capabilities of the people that are already here? Probably not. So let's maybe solve both. So I think that's fundamental. So don't stop asking the tough questions about the talent in your organization. AI is not the easy path to solve the human problems.
And we don't have AI tools where we can tell, hey, create an episode of Lean Whiskey. Here's our faces. Here's our voices. Just go make an hour and 13 minutes of episode. This is all me and Jamie, whether you like it or not.
It probably could be done, but I don't know. Well, considering the fact that you and I do this because we want to, it probably defeats the purpose.
Yeah. But I saw something the other day that seemed scary. It was supposedly a talking full motion video that was based off of a single photograph of a woman.
Yes.
So especially as we're starting to bring it back to societal issues, we're in an election year, you talk about misinformation, whatever, is already happening with bogus phone calls. And I'm sure we're going to see bogus videos, and people are probably holding it back for their October surprise, as the expression goes.
Yeah, there's plenty of that. So, again, think critically. That's still the number one piece of advice.
Yeah. All right. Well, so what's your final evaluation of your cocktail? You finished yours.
Yeah, I did finish mine. I didn't mind it. I wouldn't send it back.
It's not bad. I didn't mind it.
I didn't mind it. I
It was
wouldn't.
drinkable.
Yeah, it was good. It was good. There's 8 other cocktails that I know how to make that I probably prefer. So,
Mhm.
and are easier to make, right? Because it did get overly complex, and I think that's where it's like a rusty nail. It's 2 ingredients. I just
Scotch and
pretty
Bon
good.
Buoy, right?
Yeah. So I think it was overly complicated and
Mhm.
didn't necessarily make it better than the things that are already in my cabinet. But yet, it's always fun to try new things, and I don't mind that at all.
And I was prepared to jump it down the drain if necessary, but clearly that was not needed.
Not needed. Yeah.
I don't have a drain here on the desk for dumping out the drink. So the backup whiskey, maybe this will be in a future episode. Managed to pick up a bottle since I have it here, Hakushu 12 year, which is kind of a cousin of Yamazaki 12. Liquor store nearby had some bottles on the shelf for $75. Probably recommended retail price. I saw, forget if it was a restaurant or a bar recently that was wanting to charge $50 a pour. So I feel like, hey, snagging a bottle for 75.
Not
Happy
not
about that.
not one I've had before.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll be able to get together if you're able to come to Texas. I know we've been able to get together in Cincinnati. I can share it with you.
Sounds good. All right. So as we wrap up, as you all know, we didn't ask ChatGPT to generate a closing fun question for us, but maybe we should feed in all the questions we'd asked and then say give us 5 more, but
Yeah.
we didn't. So our question of the day is a sports team you're rooting for right now.
Well, I happen to be wearing their hat. I went to, again, those who are just listening, I will tell you in a minute what that hat is. I was able to go to a game last week, and in about an hour and 10 minutes, I will be watching them on TV the night that we're recording that. They are the Dallas Stars of the National Hockey League. Was able to go to game 5 of the first round series. It was a pivotal game 5. It was tied 2-2.
Wow.
They won it. They won a game 7 the other night. Tense, stressful, not an overtime game 7, but they have game 1 against Colorado tonight. And as a part-time Dallas resident, if I'm not cheering for the Detroit Red Wings, Dallas Stars are my second favorite team.
Fair enough.
How about you, Jamie?
I haven't
I'm
watched
guessing it's soccer.
Yeah, it's pretty much always going to be soccer. There's a little baseball thrown in for good measure, but yeah. So it's we're not done the Premier League season. We're getting close. But Everton is my team, and it's been a horrible multiple years. We got hit by points deductions for financially overspending. It's been a poorly run club for several years with some things that are out of our control. I mean, not all of out of our control. We're building a stadium to replace an over 100-year-old stadium. That costs a lot of money. And then our sponsor happened to be from a Russian company, which when the restrictions came out, our sponsorship just disappeared, like poof. Right. So
Yeah.
So how are you gonna support yourself financially all of a sudden? But Everton was on the cusp of the last 3 seasons, really, of getting relegated, which means they moved down. It's kind of like for baseball fans, you go from the major leagues to AAA, and it hasn't happened to Everton since the 50s. One of the most storied clubs in staying up at the top tier, and we achieved safety from relegation despite the points deduction with 3 games to spare. So. Still a lot of angst about next year already, but we achieved safety. But even better are huge rivals, across town rivals, cross park rivals. Really, these stadiums are very, very close to each other. Is Liverpool, and we've beaten Liverpool only once in 9 years, and beating them helped prevent them. Not the only thing that did, but helped prevent them from winning the league. And so that's as sweet as anything, right? When you get to beat your rivals and it actually means something, especially when we know we're the inferior team. So, as I'm an Evertonian, as we say,
Yeah.
Through and through for many decades.
So the equivalent might be in college football, as unrealistic as this would be. Let's say Michigan was 3-8 coming into the last game, and they managed to beat Ohio State to keep them out of the playoff.
So 1996, maybe 1990, I can't remember the year. Eddie George is there to break a record. Ohio State is number 2. They come to the Big House. I was there. Bianca Batuka ran for like 300 yards, and we knocked Ohio State out of the title race. That is the same kind of thing, just that's on a smaller scale.
Yeah. That the Big Ten's on a small scale. Compared to the Premier League, yes.
Yeah.
And so might say compared to the SEC also, but
right. So that's my got a couple weekends left of Premier League before the season's over, and then I go into hiatus and try to watch the Olympics until the season starts again in August. So.
Yeah. Well, hopefully the Stars have weeks, if not another month and a half of playing. And I did get to go to a Detroit Red Wings game in between our last episode and this one. I hadn't been to the new arena yet. Red Wings lost, but
yep. But that's awesome. I haven't been there. Been a long time actually since I've been to hockey. I used to like hockey. I just lost touch with it. So, but I wouldn't. If I went anywhere, it'd be a Red Wings game. That's probably for sure.
Oh, that'd be good. So, all right. So I poured a little splash of Hakushu because in some places it's bad luck to cheers with an empty glass. So.
That's right. We can't do that. So, cheers to AI. Cheers to the Dallas Stars. Cheers to Everton. Cheers to our listeners, and best wishes to everybody.
Cheers, Jamie.